I never imagined death would find me that night. But when it did, I met Jesus, and what he revealed about waking up between 3 and 5 a.m. will challenge everything you thought you knew about the spiritual world. My name is Rachel Matthews, and I was a 34-year-old marketing executive in Chicago who enjoyed a life of success and control. This continued until my death. What Jesus showed me about those early morning hours is not a coincidence. It is a divine call. If you've ever awoken during this time, you should hear this. But before we begin, please tell me where you're listening. It will be nice to feel closer, even if we are physically separated. Furthermore, remember to like and comment on what you thought of this near-death experience testimony. Make this channel a fair and open forum for learning from each other. Enjoy listening. It occurred on a November night 2 years ago. I had been working late, pushing myself to finish a critical project for a large client. Stress had become my constant companion, and my body was exhibiting signs of complete exhaustion. I remember feeling a sharp pain in my chest that I had ignored for weeks, blaming it on stress and long hours. I was unaware that I was experiencing a severe heart attack. As I collapsed in my home office, the world around me started to fade. The last thing I recall was the sound of my laptop hitting the floor and the flickering of my desk lamp. Then comes darkness. What happened next took me completely by surprise. I found myself in a world of indescribable light and peace. The transition occurred instantly. One moment I was in my dark, silent apartment, and the next I was surrounded by a profound, loving presence that words fail to describe. And there standing before me was Jesus. He was not as depicted in traditional religious paintings. He was both familiar and extraordinary, a being of limitless light and compassion. His eyes held the depth of eternity, and when he spoke, it was not with words but with a communication that went beyond human language. When I met Jesus, I was on the verge of dying. In that location, he addressed me directly, saying, "Rachel, I want to reveal something important to you, something that many of my children misinterpret about the hours between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Jesus told me that these hours are not random intervals of time. He clarified that these hours are indeed divine appointments. According to him, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. is when the separation between the physical and spiritual realms is especially thin. He referred to these hours as the last watch of the night, explaining that during this time, the possibility of encountering the supernatural is increased. I recall him saying, "Now is the time when the spiritual atmosphere is most receptive." In the conversation that followed, Jesus demonstrated to me that being awakened during these hours is not solely due to physical or psychological causes. Many people believe that sleep disruptions are caused by stress, natural circadian rhythms, or hormonal fluctuations. However, Jesus clarified that these waking periods have a much more profound meaning. They are invitations for his children to actively participate in spiritual warfare, to intercede on behalf of others, and to receive divine revelations that are necessary for their spiritual development. Jesus drew parallels with the biblical story of Jacob wrestling with the divine messenger. In that story, found in Genesis 32 verses 24 to 30, Jacob wrestled with a mysterious being all night and emerged with a blessing. Jesus explained that, just as Jacob's night encounter resulted in transformation and blessing, the hours between 3 and 5 a.m. offer similar opportunities for transformation in the lives of those who awaken. He stated that these hours are opportunities for spiritual transformation. There are times when the divide between heaven and earth becomes thin. I noticed that this explanation echoed the scriptural theme of seeking God and receiving his guidance during quiet reflection, as encouraged in Psalm 46 verse 10, which says, "Be still and know that I am God." During this experience, Jesus made it clear that a spiritual battle is taking place in the early morning hours. He taught me that while the forces of darkness are active and seek to influence the coming day, God has appointed ordinary people to serve as spiritual watchmen. These watchmen will stand in the gap through prayer and vigilance. He stated unequivocally that the awakenings many people have are divine summons, calls to action in the larger context of spiritual warfare. In this regard, I recall the biblical exhortation from 1 Peter 5 verse 8. "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, like a roaring lion, walks about, seeking whom he may devour." Jesus went on to specify 3 actions for those who awaken during these hours. First, Jesus emphasized that dreams are neither random nor insignificant. Instead, he described dreams as channels through which divine guidance is communicated. He believes that when people recall and interpret their dreams, they open themselves up to receiving insights, warnings, and guidance from God. I was asked to pay attention to the details of my dreams and decipher the messages hidden within them. This idea is consistent with the biblical narrative in Joel 2 verses 28 to 29, which states that God will pour out His Spirit on all people, resulting in dreams and visions that serve as signs for the future. The second action Jesus recommended was to meditate and listen intently during these quiet hours. He explained that the early morning silence is not a void but rather a space filled with spiritual significance. During these periods of uninterrupted silence, one can connect more deeply with God and receive divine guidance. Meditating would help me hear the divine voice because silence is the language of the Spirit. This teaching is consistent with the instruction given in Psalm 62 verse 1. Truly my soul finds rest in God, and my salvation comes from Him, and emphasizes the importance of quiet and focused time in God's presence. Finally, Jesus stressed the significance of saying words of blessing and protection. He asked me to speak out and affirm God's promises and sovereignty. Jesus explained that the words we say have spiritual power, and that by declaring His sovereignty, we can change the spiritual atmosphere in our favor. I was reminded of Proverbs 18 verse 21, which states that death and life are in the power of the tongue, as well as Ephesians 6 verses 10 to 18, which reminds us that we are in a spiritual battle and must put on God's full armor. By proclaiming His truth and promises, we actively contribute to the divine plan of protection and transformation. Throughout this encounter, I realized that the early morning hours are not just for personal spiritual growth. Jesus told me that they are part of a larger cosmic spiritual dynamic. He emphasized that those who experience these awakenings are active participants in a larger spiritual narrative. Our actions during these moments of wakefulness benefit not only our own spiritual journey, but also the lives of others. Many people are unaware of the true nature of these experiences, instead accepting scientific explanations that link them to biological phenomena. However, Jesus revealed to me that these explanations only scratch the surface of a much deeper spiritual reality. In addition to explaining the significance of these hours, Jesus discussed the practical implications of connecting with the spiritual realm during these times. He described how His children's wakefulness had prevented disasters, healed broken families, and redirected negative spiritual energies. These occurrences, he claimed, were carefully orchestrated divine interventions rather than random acts or coincidences. I listened as he explained that the supernatural events that occur during these hours are part of His redemptive work, in which each individual plays an important role. This teaching is reflected in passages such as Romans 8 verses 38 to 39, which state that nothing can separate us from God's love, reminding us of the protective and unifying power of His presence. One of Jesus' main points was that scientific and psychological explanations for our wakefulness, stress, circadian rhythms, and hormonal fluctuations are limited in scope. While these explanations may illustrate some aspects of the phenomenon, they fail to address the full spiritual significance of what is occurring. Instead, Jesus explained that these early morning awakenings are divine invitations. They call us to engage in spiritual warfare and intercession, to hear the Spirit's voice, and to proclaim God's promises. This viewpoint is not intended to dismiss scientific insights, but rather to supplement them with a more profound understanding of the spiritual world. As stated in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7, we walk by faith, not by sight, implying that there is more to our existence than what can be measured or observed with the human senses alone. However, Jesus stressed that these awakenings are not meant to scare or overwhelm. Rather, He clarified that His intention was to involve His children in His redemptive mission. He explained that He doesn't wake people up at these hours to scare them, but to work with them to achieve spiritual breakthroughs. In this context, the individual's role shifts from passive reception to active participation. Jesus' words were direct and unembellished, intended to convey a sense of duty and purpose rather than an invitation to be anxious. The message is one of empowerment, a call to recognize the opportunity for positive change that exists within these moments of wakefulness. I was made aware that the power of these hours goes beyond personal spiritual development. According to Jesus, what happens in the early morning hours has cosmic implications. They are linked to the overall spiritual health of communities, families, and even entire countries. He emphasized that when his children rise during these hours and engage in intercessory prayer, they can influence the spiritual trajectory of the following day. The concept that each moment of wakefulness is an opportunity for divine intervention resonated with a scriptural message found in James 5 verse 16, which states, "The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective." This notion emphasizes the responsibility that comes with being aware of these divine appointments. Jesus also gave specific instructions on how to approach the phenomenon of dreams during these early hours. He explained that dreams are a direct line of communication from God. When a person recalls a dream, it is critical to consider whether it contains a message intended for them. This message could be a form of guidance, a warning, or simply a manifestation of God's ongoing work in their lives. I was encouraged to document my dreams and seek a reasonable interpretation of their meaning. In this regard, Jesus' teaching is similar to the guidance given in Acts 2 verse 17, where the arrival of the Holy Spirit is associated with the outpouring of dreams and visions. Dream interpretation, when done with discernment and prayer, can lead to a deeper understanding of one's purpose and the divine plan that God has put in motion. The instructions to meditate and listen during these hours were also clear and straightforward. Jesus explained that the silence and stillness of the early morning are ideal for deep reflection and communion with the divine. In those moments, free of the distractions of the day, one can focus on the Holy Spirit's guidance. I was told that meditation in this context does not necessitate elaborate rituals or practices, but rather a simple and sincere effort to quiet the mind and heart. This practice is consistent with the exhortation in Psalm 1 verse 2, which states that the person who meditates on God's law day and night will be like a tree planted by streams of water. The emphasis is on consistency and sincerity in seeking God's presence. The third instruction, to declare and decree, was given in equally straightforward terms. Jesus explained that words have power, and that when believers speak out God's promises, they are actively participating in the spiritual battle that occurs every day. He emphasized that declarations of God's sovereignty are more than just empty words. They are infused with spiritual authority. I was reminded of a biblical principle found in Mark 11 verse 23, which discusses the power of faith-filled declarations. In practical terms, speaking blessings over one's life, family, or community helps to establish God's will on earth. Declaring God's truth acknowledges His power and serves as spiritual resistance to negative forces. Throughout our encounter, Jesus emphasized that these actions, recalling dreams, meditating in silence, and proclaiming God's promises, are not optional. They are essential to the role that His children are supposed to play in the divine story. He explained that every occurrence of wakefulness in the early morning hours is a call to action. These calls are meant to be answered with deliberate and informed actions that are consistent with God's will. The clear message is that people should not dismiss these moments as mere inconveniences. Instead, they should see them as chances to change their lives and spirituality. It is important to note that Jesus' explanation emphasized partnership. He clarified that His children are not expected to bear the burden of spiritual warfare alone. Rather, He invites them to participate in His redemptive work. This partnership entails acknowledging the divine significance of each moment and acting in accordance with the guidance given. As I listened, I realized that the invitation was extended to everyone, not just a select few, who are willing to recognize the signs of God's active presence. This viewpoint is supported by the message of John 10 verse 10, in which Jesus states, "I came that they might have life and have it abundantly." He defines abundant life as being aware of and participating in divine appointments. Following a detailed explanation of the spiritual significance of the early morning hours, I was shown numerous examples of how such awakenings benefited people's lives. Jesus explained that throughout history, many people have been awakened during these hours without fully comprehending the spiritual significance of their encounters. Often, these people simply attributed their awakenings to stress or the body's natural processes. However, Jesus clarified that these seemingly ordinary incidents conceal a profound invitation to interact with the spiritual realm. He stated that countless families, communities, and even entire regions have benefited from the timely interventions that occur during these periods of arousal. The emphasis was on the proactive nature of these interventions, rather than passive acceptance of daily events. This teaching is consistent with the scriptural lesson in Romans 12 verse 2, which calls believers to be transformed by the renewing of their minds rather than conforming to the patterns of this world. It implies that transformation results from an active involvement in God's purposes. As our conversation progressed, I gained further insight into the nature of these divine appointments. Jesus explained that the spiritual battles that take place early in the morning are not limited to a single person or event. Rather, they are part of a larger, ongoing cosmic conflict between the forces of light and dark. In this struggle, each moment of awakening provides an opportunity to realign spiritual energies in support of God's redemptive plan. I was told that the actions taken during these hours, whether through intercessory prayer, reflective meditation, or verbal declarations, have the potential to influence the world's spiritual state. This understanding brings to mind 2 Corinthians 10 verses 4-5, which describes the weapons of our warfare as divinely powerful and capable of destroying strongholds. It serves as a reminder that spiritual efforts in these moments are part of a larger strategy to effect positive change. Jesus went on to explain that the hours between 3 and 5 a.m. are intentionally set aside as a time when God's spiritual work is most active. This phenomenon is not a random occurrence but rather a deliberate arrangement by the Creator. He taught that the early morning silence creates an environment in which the body's natural rhythms are suspended, allowing a person to be more fully attuned to the supernatural. This explanation's simplicity is reinforced by the biblical reminder in Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. In this case, the early morning hours have been designated as a time of divine encounter and spiritual readiness. Then Jesus reminded me that the experience was not meant to cause anxiety or fear. On the contrary, his words were meant to empower and prepare me for a role that many people had yet to recognize. He stated unequivocally, "I don't wake you to scare you, but to collaborate with you in my redemptive work." He showed me countless examples of how people's nighttime awakenings had prevented disasters, brought healing to families, and redirected spiritual paths. These were not coincidences but carefully planned divine interventions. When it was time for me to return, Jesus' final words rang true in my spirit. "Remember, my child, that the hours between 3 and 5 a.m. are not a curse but a blessing. They are not interruptions but invitations." My return to my physical body was as unexpected as my departure. I awoke in a hospital surrounded by medical staff, my heart having been revived. But I had fundamentally changed. Since then, I've dedicated my life to sharing this revelation. I've spoken in churches, written books, and counseled numerous people on the spiritual significance of these early morning hours. Not everybody understands. Some call me a radical while others call me crazy. However, those who have had these divine awakenings understand the truth. They recognize that there is more to our existence than meets the eye, and that our spiritual journey cannot be explained solely by science. Do not dismiss the situation if you consistently wake up between 3 and 5 a.m. Don't ignore this. This moment is an invitation to something extraordinary. Pay attention. Listen. Pray. Declare. Your nighttime awakening could be the key to changing not only your life, but the lives of those around you. God is speaking. Are you listening?